Hello and welcome. It's Catherine Colas here from Simply Hormones, and I'm here to talk a bit more about menopause today. And my guest today is Angela Hobbs of Wilkinson Hall. Angela has worked with an impressive list of global companies over the past 30 years, but because of her true focus, which was sustainability and responsibility, as well as gender equality, all close to my own heart, Angela went on to set up her own company, Wilkinson Hall, which enables the sustainable delivery of products and services, the latest of which is the design of a menopause app, which Angela will tell us about today. But before I pass that over to Angela, I have to tell you that we first met a very few short weeks ago when Angela came to my book launch in London, and we had a bit of a natter then. So she's my guest today. Welcome, Angela, and please tell us more about what you do and your app.
Thank you very, very much, Catherine. That's a lovely introduction. So yes, I had the idea for creating an app some time ago when I'd been looking at internal and external barriers to women in the workplace, and what were the things that were getting in the way of women realizing their true potential. And I had, as part of a dissertation some years ago for an MSc, I did quite a lot of research into that. And then, at a much later stage, discovered that actually one of the biggest blocks that women had to face was the menopause.
Yeah.
And to start with, it was my absolute confusion, which won't be a shock to you because you've spent so much time dedicating your learning to this, that menopause just really wasn't managed or supported in many places, and it was having such a detrimental effect on careers.
Yes.
And it really made me think I wanted to do something about it.
Yes.
So I started researching and engaging with different people, and I ran a few user groups and talked to women, and the more I talked, the more I learned that this was not simply a minor problem. This was a major, real thing that was having such a big impact. And because my background is in digital, and I've had experiences in producing digital health products and services, I thought for me that was the natural way to go. So I focused on creating the app, which is in development now with the software company, and we're looking to have a demonstrator marketable version ready by the end of this month, which is really exciting. And even more exciting now I've met you and we've talked about so many shared ideas.
Yes, I think we talk ad nauseum, I think is the phrase, yes. Yeah, that's brilliant, and that really does speak volumes to me. And I emailed somebody the other day that I want to interview, and they specialise in equality, diversity, and getting more women into the higher rankings in the workplace. And their take on it at the moment is they don't have time to deal with menopause. They're too busy dealing with the boardroom, which I perfectly understand. So I might, and as they use a lot of volunteers, as it were, I might just go and volunteer just to get a better insight into what they're really trying to do, because I think they're really missing a thing or two, because they're not going, in my view, they're not going to get the women on boards or to those senior executive levels unless they understand menopause in the workplace, because as you've already said, it's a barrier.
Yes, I completely agree. And one of the things and that I felt was so important is that whatever information was available in the app had to be something that any line manager or any person would be comfortable having in their hand to use. So I want to make sure that a man visiting the app and thinking, how do I understand more about the menopause so I can be an informed manager and a helpful manager. And equally, I didn't want it to be anything that would exclude younger women who weren't yet experiencing it. So I've focused very much with the team on making an almost a gender neutral app, but it's a useful tool for anybody who wants to find out more. And there are more detailed sections within the app where women who are experiencing the menopause can log symptoms. They can look at the social prescribing activities that have an impact and help. There's a big area on nutrition and lots about tools for the workplace too.
Yes, and I think it's important for younger women, because those women themselves suspect that there's something going on, but they can't get the recognition from GPs or anywhere or anyone else because they're too young, in inverted commas, and they find it hugely distressing trying to get through that treacle, that minefield of getting somebody to understand what they're going through and give it a name. Menopause, and then they can, it's still a shock to the system, but then they have pathways open up to them about how to deal with that, who they can talk to, and different helplines that they can relate to. So it's gender neutral, as you said. It's got to be for everyone, age neutral as well.
Age neutral too, yes, and you're absolutely right. And it's so easy, and I'm sure many of your listeners will be aware of this too, that when you become very passionate and involved with a subject, sometimes I overlook the obvious.
Yes.
And there was a particular example where I was pitching. I'm embarrassed to say, because I've actually trained other people to pitch. I was pitching, and I gave a 15-minute presentation to a room full of investors, talking about the business model for the app, how it could be used, who it was intended for. And I got to the end of the presentation, and the first question was from a young man in the audience, and he put his hand up and he said, "What's the menopause?" I took that as, one, my error. I should have started by explaining, but I had actually overlooked, because my assumption was that, well, of course everybody knows what the menopause is, but of course they don't. And we have to go backwards and test our own assumptions, don't we? And not assume that everyone knows what it is, because even in 2020, people don't know about it or understand. But I'm sure you've probably come across that many times.
Yes, yeah. I think it was when I was in a room full of men. We were doing some training with line managers, and one of them, I thought, there was one chap in there, I thought he's a bit young, and then as the workshop progressed, he was really getting involved and engaged, and then he said, "I can see my mum. This is what's happening to my mum." And so it spoke volumes to him. And I thought, so you're not too young to attend these workshops, because there's a woman in your life that this applies to. And then by recognizing that it's your mother or your sister or your aunt, you can then apply it to your work colleagues and your teams.
Absolutely. That is such a valid point too, isn't it? Really important. And I think that in one of the user trials we did for the app in the early stages of development, some of the women we spoke to were they were all incredibly helpful, but the group of women we spoke to who were under 40 frequently would say, really happy to share my knowledge and my experience, but I don't think this is going to happen to me for several years. And there is also that kind of, well, it's not really relevant. And yet I do believe that the more we're aware and the more we share stories, even if it's to help your best friend and not just yourself, or your mother or your aunt, then isn't that a wonderful thing that we understand it?
Yeah, and I think it also answers questions for those women that are now postmenopausal, because if they're attending a workshop or reading about something, listening to something, a light bulb goes on and they say, I thought I'd, swam through the menopause without any problems, but I can now see that I've ticked all those boxes, and all those crazy little small things that were happening to me had something to do with menopause. So it's interesting, and it's so valuable for everyone. As you've said, it's all ages and genders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that ties in with some of the conversations I had too, where the most common feedback was, I went to see my GP, and when I got there, I felt uncomfortable and I wasn't able to describe what had happened. And this story was repeated several times. So within the app, we've also focused very much on having the facility to capture information in the way people want to input their own data. So you can remind yourself, and if you have to go and talk to somebody else about it to get medical advice, then it's all there within easy reach, rather than us all having to trawl back and think, well, was that the menopause, or was I tired, or was I stressed? So there are so many things that help us deny its existence, aren't there?
Yeah. I think it's absolutely marvellous what you're doing, and it just so contributes to this whole field of work that women themselves are now putting out there, because you and I aren't doctors, we don't diagnose or prescribe, we're just understanding it from a different angle, and that's what women seem to want to hear. The true stories, the relativity of the stories, rather than a medical diagnosis.
I couldn't agree more. And I think sometimes just the opportunity to hear from somebody else that, hey, that happened to me, or I know how you feel, or don't worry, it's normal. It can normalize and remove the taboo. And that in itself is a big step.
It is.
Being able to live with it and manage it ourselves.
Yeah, it's a huge relief. Well, I think on that note, because I don't want to keep these interviews going for very long, that's a good point for us to stop. And I just welcome any feedback from people watching and listening to this interview that I've had today with Angela Hobbs. Thank you once again for joining us, Angela, and I'm sure we'll speak again real soon.
Thank you, Catherine. It was a pleasure.